Um, Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge our town historian, Doris Jane Smith, who can thankfully be joining us tonight. Now, to begin our program, I will turn it over to the speaker, Constance Kehoe, for the evening.
Thank you, Tara. Thank you. Thank you so very much. I'm going to, before I begin my remarks tonight, I am going to introduce you to Grace Zimmerman, who you probably all know, and she has prepared a few slides. She serves as Vice President of the Historical Society in Somers. So I will do my share screen if we can do this easily and quickly, and Grace will speak for a few minutes about some hyper-local things that you guys have been digging into.
Thanks, Constance. Just wanted to give everybody a brief overview of the Revolutionary War here in Somers. The land that is now Somers was located in the eastern segment of an 83,000-acre tract of land granted by King William III of England to Stephanus Van Cortlandt in 1697. The town of Somers was originally named Stephentown by an act of the New York State Legislature in 1788 in deference to Stephanus Van Cortlandt. Van Cortlandt descendants still live here today. While Somers saw no major conflicts during the Revolution and was considered neutral ground with roving bands of so-called cowboys and skinners, a lot did happen here behind the scenes. Constance will speak to that later. There are, however, three historical developments during the Revolution, two of which have come to light in recent years in Somers that I wish to share with you briefly. They involve Haight's Tavern, Rochambeau, and Somers Revolutionary War veterans. Haight's Tavern. Through census and land records, it's established that Revolutionary War Captain Samuel Haight, a Somers resident, operated a tavern in a building located across the street from Ivandale Cemetery in the Somers Hamlet National Register District. His private residence, also in the Somers Hamlet National Register District, at the curve on Route 116, was built on land purchased from the Van Cortlandt family heirs. In 2019, though, we learned of an exciting development that requires more research that I wanted to share with you all tonight. We learned through an individual doing genealogical research on Haight, uncovered documents, receipts, and papers indicating General Washington was knowledgeable about the tavern's existence. According to this gentleman's findings, Captain Haight and his tavern were mentioned in Washington's official papers numerous times. Included in his findings was a handwritten receipt in the National Archives from 1780, indicating Washington and his staff breakfasted at Haight's Tavern. And again in 1781 and 82, he found mention of Haight's Tavern as being a location utilized by a chain of express riders between Washington's headquarters and Danbury, Connecticut. Rochambeau and his troops passed through Somers on their return from Yorktown, Virginia, traversing Granite Springs Road and what is now Route 202, across town and into North Salem in the vicinity of Dean's Bridge. For this reason, Somers is on the Washington-Rochambeau Revolutionary Route National Historic Trail. Parts of the original roadbed still exist on land across from the Granite Springs Garage. And lastly, several dozen patriots from Somers who fought in the American Revolution are interred in the various cemeteries here in town. Included are Colonel Benjamin Greene, whose inn was the site of Somers, then known as Stephentown, first town meeting in 1788. An interesting aside, Somers has a connection to Enoch Crosby, the well-known Revolutionary War spy, through Colonel Greene's widow, Margaret. After her first husband, Benjamin Greene, died, Margaret married Enoch Crosby. This is just part of the puzzle, and Constance will take us through the rest of the puzzle of Westchester County.
All right, how does that look? You all see that? Got a yes from Tara. You can see my slide. Great. Okay. All right. So I'm really excited to cover all of this 8 years of war, 1776, you all know that year, 1783. I mean, the war went on here in Westchester until the British evacuated New York City in November of 1783. So there's much to tell and many places where things happened. Now, Revolutionary Westchester 250, we are a nonprofit. We started investigating what happened here in Westchester, I'm going to say 3 years ago. And I worked with Dr. Eric Weiselberg, who was also a public school teacher full-time. And he and I started thinking about all the places around Westchester, and we just started, sticking stars on it. But, we're up to about 52 different places where there's some monument, something happened. And I mean, don't panic. I'm not going to try to do 52 places. I think I'll mention in some respects about 20 places across the county tonight. But let's get a little context here for Westchester County itself. I mean, many of you know this already, and you heard Grace mention the neutral ground. So to get oriented with this map, you see the Hudson River here on the left, you see Long Island Sound on the right, you see Somers up here, and above that, of course, what was then Dutchess and now Putnam County. Now, you see some lines, and I'll explain this little schema. The British, almost from the first days in 1776, were down here in Manhattan. And they controlled a great deal of the area for almost 8 years below this line, more or less. Now up here, I have a red dotted line, and above that red dotted line, the Patriots were a little safer. There were many settlers, farmers, mill workers, carpenters, families who moved. If they were supporting the Patriots and they were in anywhere in this area, they often moved up more north. And if they were loyalists supporting the British, they often moved down here, down in this area. So you can see that the term neutral ground is on this schema, but frankly, it wasn't experienced as neutral for 8 years. It was a no man's land. It was roving gangs. It was families divided. Lots of violence, burning of crops and homes, and we will touch on that, but it's quite a theme. It kind of makes me think when I've seen all the things about Ukraine recently. I mean, civilians and people who had no really desire to get involved in a war, this is what was experienced here. All right, so let's do a little focus now on just the very first year of the war. We'll jump, of course, through the other time periods, but 1776 here in Westchester, there was a major crucial battle that took place during that year, but also we all know it as the year of the Declaration of Independence. So I'm very proud of this document that you see here. And you see over here, it says White Plains, July 9th, 1776. Well, most people think of July 4th and you think of Philadelphia, but without going into too much detail, this is a broadside, the kind of thing that was printed at the time. And believe it or not, there are several of these documents that still exist, all this almost 250 years later. One of them is in the Westchester County Archives. They are worth millions of dollars, but that's an aside. Just in case you have something in your attic that you think might be worth something, it's like, look, keep it. Anyway, so what's important about this is that although Philadelphia was the main story, New York required the delegates from New York that went to Philadelphia to get the approval back from the group in White Plains. They were called the Fourth Provisional Congress of New York. So they got the information from Philadelphia. They had to approve it, vote yay or nay, before this declaration was unanimous from all the 13 colonies. So, you know, we all know they voted yay, we're supporting the declaration. But this is the cool thing, I think, at the top of that broadside. This is the first time you saw anywhere it called the state of New York. It wasn't a colony anymore. And so White Plains, I think, fairly calls itself, you know, the birthplace of the state of New York. Now, here we have, now you have to know these paintings, so it was done around 1900. These paintings are a little fanciful, but this was the idea that we know they read this document to people in front of what was then the courthouse, the Westchester County Courthouse. It's not where our courthouse is now, but I'll show you where it was. And this was John Thomas reading that. We know a lot about what happened, and there were people gathered to hear it. So this is what you can see today. It's in front of what was called the Armory. It's private property. It's in downtown White Plains. And it is the place where this was read, where the courthouse was. So I think, you know, it's a very cool thing to me to be in a place, just like if you go on that road in Somers, you know, you feel Rochambeau. I feel like you go to places in person, you stand there, and that's partly why we've gotten so involved in places. Okay, so moving on. I mentioned that it's in 1776 that the Battle of White Plains, it was late October, occurred. That's an hour-long talk, so we're just dancing through this. But what you see on the left, they know they did not have photography then. This is, in fact, a reenactment in 2001. I did not see this, but this is a big deal. This was in Ward Pound Ridge Reservation, as I understand it, and I have gotten a commitment from the county that in 2026, which is the year of the actual 250th commemoration, that's in 4 years, that we'll be able to have another big reenactment of that battle. So stay tuned. But the reason I pair it here on the right with a place I hope you have been to, or if you haven't, you go. This is St. Paul's Church, National Historic Site in Mount Vernon. And the reason I'm pairing these is you can learn about what happened right before the Battle of White Plains by going to this church and getting one of their tours. Now, let me tell you a little more about that. Okay, here's one of these old maps. I start with the Battle of Pell's Point that came a week or so before the battle the Battle of Pell's Point preceded the Battle of White Plains. And of course, White Plains is more north. So what you can do if you want to go to a place, or a couple of things you can go to. This is Glover's Rock. Maybe some of you have been there. It's actually over the border into New York City in Pelham Bay Park. But Colonel Glover, there's a whole lot of things that Colonel Glover is famous for. But one is what he did here when the British were invading at this Battle of Pell's Point. Now, what I've learned from the folks at St. Paul's is that you take a tour of Split Rock Golf Course, and that's where things really happened, and that this marker isn't maybe quite in the right place, but it does bring home that some very important things happened previous to the Battle of White Plains. Now, all this is still 1776. There's a lot more to go, so we have to move along. So again, these paintings, again, are a little imaginary, but it gives us a good sense. So we're now in White Plains, and many of you have no doubt heard of Chatterton Hill. So this is a reimagined scene during the early parts of the Battle of White Plains. And what you see on the left, some of you are figuring out, what river is this? What river is this? Bingo, you got it. It's the Bronx River. And what you see, these little dots over here, these red dots, these are the British waiting to make their effort to take Chatterton Hill, while the Patriots are bringing their artillery up to the top of Chatterton Hill, which was one of the highest points in White Plains. So, and also, we want to bring in, you know, the famous, we got Alexander Hamilton. Most evidence seems to indicate that he actually was an artillery guy, and that he was there. So the invasion happened, the Patriots at the top of the hill repulsed, but the third time they were overrun, and the British did take this important hill in the Battle of White Plains. So you could say story over, right? Well, not quite. There are a lot of things you can see in White Plains and get a feel for the whole breadth of this very complicated battle, because there were things that happened in other places. This is the Purdy House. I'm sure in Q&A, some of you will say, I've been there, it's great. It actually physically got moved from one place to another, but it's an old tenant farmhouse, and it did play a role during the battles with Washington at various other points during the 8 years of war. But every year, not every year, but almost every year, the White Plains Historical Society and others organize some recognition of the battle. And you can really learn a lot by coming to these events. So here's an interior shot. It's really a lovely setting, and I would recommend looking at the calendars and seeing it in, you know, late October, that you could go there. Now, here's another good story of repair and preservation. This is the Miller House. And the Miller House, some of you who grew up around here will probably remember it was falling apart badly. Just like 3 or 4 years ago, County Executive Latimer, David Buchwald, City of White Plains, and very much the North Castle Historical Society, because this is actually part of North Castle. This was restored, and now there's a little visitor center, and it's a great interior little shot here. And programs are now being run there too. So both of those are places to go. There are other places around White Plains that need preservation. Frankly, there's a place called Mount Misery. You can read about that. There's a lot that happened when the important part of this battle is that you could look at it as a defeat, but Washington kept his army intact and managed to retreat and to fight another day. So he didn't give up the army, and he didn't give up the fight. So what happened next? All right, we're moving out of White Plains up into what is now the town of Portland. For Planks Point, to me, is one of the great places in the county to visit. It's, I'll show you some current pictures, but you may know it as King's Ferry. You've probably also heard of Stony Point, but this is where Washington brought his army to cross over the Hudson, to go down, well, that, you know, this is the Rockland side, to go down through New Jersey. He was soon at Washington's Crossing near Trenton, and you know the story of crossing the Delaware and the positive outcome of that time when there were two very important victories that Washington had. And that was what, a month after this Battle of White Plains. So I'll be coming back to this point because as a place where a lot happened, that's not the only thing that happened at Verplancks Point. Here is what it looks like today. You know, there's some places to park and public area, and I find it just a beautiful place to try to understand what happened. All right, because we can't take a breath, we got to keep going. What I'm going to now do is give a little bit of that sense that Grace told you about all these roving bands and destruction and fires and fear and killings, because this was the raids and destruction. I'll just give you a bit of an overview of that. This is Van Cortlandt Manor, and that's open to the public at various times. It is up in what the area where I showed the northern part in that map where I had the red line. It's on the Croton River, and you would say, oh, well, if you're a patriot, you're pretty safe there. Well, rich or poor, you know, free or enslaved, women, men, children, really nobody was very safe, because the British did raid this this manor house of the Van Cortlandts, and even though they were very wealthy, they still saw destruction there. Now I've moved you down to Yonkers, and this is the other manor house. This is Phillips Manor Hall, and it is under construction right now for improvements, but come September, I was just asking the state parks. This is a state national historic site. So I just asked him, when is it opening again? And he said, hopefully September. A lot of improvements in this for visitors, but it played a role in various ways. But because it was very close to New York City, many times the British and their auxiliary troops, the Hessians, were in charge of this area of Yonkers and used this site. But keep watching for when it reopens. It's going to be amazing. All right, so here are these two guys, the two lords of the manors, and I just put them next to each other because Phillips Manor Hall, the one you saw that, he kept his loyalty to the British. And as a result, his property was confiscated. He was considered a dangerous person as far as the new American government was concerned. And his 52,000 acres were confiscated. And we'll talk about what happened to that. Pierre Van Cortlandt, on the other hand, you know, was on the winning side, I guess you could say. And his family and he became very involved in New York politics and elected offices. Not to say, you know, these were wealthy, very wealthy men, and some of their wealth was from the labor from enslaved persons of African descent. And slavery was abolished in New York in 1827. So during this time period, there were free and enslaved persons of African descent here in Westchester. Okay, destruction, fires, burning of entire villages and areas. So Bedford, many of you know, because if you're up there in northern Westchester. I'm down here in Irvington, by the way. Frequently over the years, the historical societies and history groups in Bedford reenact what's called the burning of Bedford. There's associated with a notorious British officer, Bannister Tarleton. He did raid this village and also Pound Ridge, and he about 10 days later, another British General Birch came back to Bedford and burned everything except one home of a loyalist. It's a complicated story. There's a lot, there's a good exhibit right now in Pound Ridge with information about this. And I think it's next week. I'm going to South Salem to get some information about things that went on in that area of Westchester. So just as an example, you might live on a farm and your hogs were all stolen and the fence, your fences that you worked so hard to build were taken for firewood, and you moved your whole family out, but you came back and all your crops were burned. So these are the kinds of things that happened year after year in this area. Okay, yikes, what's happening here? All right. So again, those of you who are astute and looking at this painting, you may recognize it as a Don Troiani painting. Some of you have seen others. I think there's a big exhibit right now in Philadelphia at the Museum of the American Revolution. But can you tell where we are? You know, you look over here, you've got some clues. Okay, I bet a couple of you said the Palisades in your head. This is Hastings on Hudson. And this is a depiction after quite a bit of research by Troiani of what's called the Battle of Edgar's Lane. Some people, one group calls it a skirmish, one group calls it a battle. There were about 400, 500 troops involved. It looks to me like a battle. I don't know, I'm not a military person, but what's going on and how is it significant during this time of raids and destruction? Well, it was called a harvest raid. The whole army of the British, including the Hessians, in the New York area needed to eat every day, and their horses needed feed, and they needed supplies. And it was a big issue of the folks in Westchester and also New Jersey and Long Island, because they were subject to these foraging raids. So a group of Hessians came up from the south, I'd say on Route 9, but I guess that it's a little unfair to use current terminology. And they ran into a group of mounted Continental troops who knew they were coming by a tip-off. Now, what I learned when I was in Hastings last week, talking to some of the folks there, that I hadn't realized in this picture. Well, first of all, I knew the Hessians wore green and red, and they are the soldiers on horseback, where their uniforms are green trimmed in red, but also that their horses had, their saddles had these soft, I guess, sheepskin, lamb's wool. So all Troiani put them there. The Patriots are buff and green. Now, what about this guy over here on the white horse? Well, he's, I was told, the bugler, and he switched around from buff with green to green with buff. Okay, but what you can see today, and the reason I draw attention to this, is something that I think is a very good educational tool, which is panels of information, well done, visually interesting, at the place where something happened. So Revolutionary Hastings and the Hastings Historical Society has worked for about 3 years. And you can now visit this site where they have 7 panels, informational panels. There's one closer up, and you can really get the context of what happened. It's not just, oh, there was a battle here. I drove by there for 40 years living around here, and I just saw Battle of Edgar's Lane, like ho hum. But with these informational panels, and they have blue stones and a bench, it really makes a lovely way to learn about the context and what happened. So I suggest you go down there. You can just stop. There's a park across the street and just peruse it. Here's another one of the panels. Our historian that I mentioned that works with Revolutionary Westchester, he did about 85 pages of research for them. And then they boiled it down to use the information of the, historian's work to bring it to life. And then they got cartographers and others, and they're happy to share how they did what they did. All right, another incredible effort up in Yorktown Heights. I bet a lot of you have been there. This is the monument to the Rhode Island Regiment, and they were stationed near the Croton River, near what's known as Pines Bridge. And they were, that regiment was essentially massacred almost when they were attacked brutally at dawn when they were in the headquarters at a place called Davenport House. Now that's in private hands, but the Rhode Island Regiment was recruited in Rhode Island, and they offered freedom to enslaved persons who would fight for the length of the war. And they, as it happened, they were serving here. They were also indigenous members as well. And their Colonel Green, the white officer, he was also killed there. They do a great reenactment. This is Dwayne Jackson. If you ever get a chance to meet Dwayne, he's wonderful. He lives in Buchanan. And all right, changing the pace, take a breath. This is the Quaker Meeting House. The Quaker Meeting House in Chappaqua. You probably know something about the Quakers in that they do not religiously believe in taking the life of other human beings, and they did not want to be involved in either side of this war. But it was hard living in Westchester and not getting involved, not getting affected. So various things happened. This is not, the building per se isn't open to the public, but the burial ground behind is very evocative, and it really gives you a feel for this part of the county. And it's a very old building. It existed here during the war, and some of the soldiers that were wounded in the Battle of White Plains as Washington was retreated actually were hospitalized, you could say here, and apparently some of them died, but nobody really knows for sure exactly where their bodies, their remains are. Oh, I get to Dwayne again. Okay, there we go. All right, this is a very exciting story. You heard a little bit about spies from Grace, but if I say the traitor, the spy, and the captors, 1780, I know some of you on this will know exactly what's part of history we're talking about. So here we will look at the traitor. Benedict Arnold was the general in charge of West Point in 1780. Now you see this called the North River, that's the Hudson. The native people called it the river that flows both ways. And of course we call it the Hudson River. But all of the spy and the collusion was because the Hudson River, the control of the Hudson River was strategically critical to both sides. Both sides, the British and the Continental, the Patriots wanted to control this river. So here we have Benedict Arnold on the right. He is willing to give all the information to the British about the defenses around West Point in exchange for money, fame, what he thought would be fame, and he went to the other side. He colluded with Major John André, who was working he's in the British Army, and he was located at that point in New York, and he was the contact that Benedict Arnold communicated with. Well, things developed, and again, this is a tale to tell for about 3 hours, but part of the story, just to give you a flavor for it, because much of it took place in Westchester, Major André drew this, actually. He was charming and talented and could write poetry and songs and was an artist. And he was being rowed in this little drawing to meet Arnold. After leaving the ship called the Vulture, he had come up from New York City, and they were meeting, and they did meet on the other side of the Hudson, what we call the Rockland side of the Hudson, and talked through the night. And then he was to leave and get back on the Vulture after they did their colluding. But he found out that the Vulture had moved down river a bit, and he could no longer get on it. And why did it move? Because on the shores from Teller's Point, Croton Point, and the Patriots over there had shot at the ship, and it had to move to avoid being damaged. And I guess it was damaged a little, but he was now stuck. So what does André do? All right, so here's again these slightly imagined pictures of this tale. André standing there is about to take these 6 pieces of paper from Benedict Arnold, and Benedict Arnold is seated there pointing at his boot with the idea that, okay, he's going to put these in his boot. He's going to take the papers to the British back in New York, and he's going to change his clothes out of his uniform, and he's going to travel by land through Westchester back to New York. And he agrees to do this. We wonder. He also has a pass written by and signed by Arnold to John Anderson. So he's taken on the name, and he had taken on this name before, John Anderson. And he thinks now he will travel back, and the deal will be done, and West Point will get taken over by the British. Well, not so fast. A militia unit of Westchester militiamen that actually, they were headquartered more in South Salem, but they were on a particular task that day from their unit to look for cattle thieves. That was, as you know, that was like a big part of what was going on in Westchester. Both armies needed to eat, and the British were particularly, and other, roving bands stealing food, and they were to be on the lookout. So they are near Tarrytown here, 3 militiamen, and along comes André. Through many things that happened and are said, and again, that's a long and interesting story, but if you do go to Tarrytown, the Tarrytown folks at the Tarrytown Historical Society are very well versed in this, and they have an André room where they have some artifacts, and they very much know the history of these folks. So Paulding, Van Wart, and Williams, those 3 are the captors. They capture André. They're suspicious of the things he says. They search him, and one of them can read. Paulding can read, and he's looking at these papers, and he knows he's got to take this guy back to his commanding officer, which he does. So many things happen after that, but I'm very anxious to see a trail through all of Westchester that makes it possible for visitors to see all these different sites and get a sense of this whole intricate details of what happened with André traveling, of the militiamen coming to the places where they were looking for the cattle thieves. But here's some really cool things. Oh yeah, that's one of the sheets in the showing all the detail. There are, what, 167 men from Colonel Lamb's regiment. So the British would know everything from this. Anyway, what happens? All right, André's burial place at Tappan. So André is hanged as a spy. He has a trial and he's hanged as a spy. Paulding, Van Wart, and Williams get honored. They get some land, they get commendation, and there are medals made to honor them. And in Terrytown, this monument is created, and then it's enhanced and expanded with a statue of Paulding on the top. Now, here is the thing that when I found this out, I thought this was amazing. So 100 years after the capture, I guess you call that the centennial, there's this event, this commemoration in Terrytown, and 70,000 people came. 70,000 people. Anyway, right now you can go to you can go to Patriots Park too. Patriots Park is a very cool place. I think there'll be a lot of things over the next 4 years, if all goes well, events trying to tell the history of that. Warner Library, by the way, Tara, is right next door. And Warner Library has been very anxious to get involved with this stuff about the revolution. But do not call this the monument to André. This is not a monument to André. It's a monument to the captors. Okay. Now we have to march quickly with Rochambeau. I think I hope our time is okay. I'll try to talk even faster if I need to. Towards the end of the war, 1781 and 1782, you already heard the name of Rochambeau. Well, the French came as our allies, and they came to Westchester. They were here for 6 weeks in the summer of 1781, and they were with Washington's army, encamped all across what we know of, Dobbs Ferry, Ardsley, across to parts of White Plains. What you see here in this is Rochambeau's headquarters with this, and it's what we know now as Hartsdale. And about a mile away or so, near Ardsley High School, would have been Washington's headquarters. There's nothing there to see, though the Ardsley Historical Society is trying to get this marker up, and they're working hard to recognize this. But what happened here? Well, a lot. Again, this is about a 3-hour talk, so we're going to go very quickly, just like they did. But the French came here and encamped with Washington with the sense of how are the Allies' armies now going to finally defeat the British. And there are many maps. The French were great map makers, and we have a lot of maps of the time period, and they're showing here some of their camps. They were in camp, they left, they came back. But what I wanted to show you was, again, a modern depiction of Rochambeau and Washington making some major decisions right here in Westchester County when they learned the details that they needed to figure out how they were going to beat the British. And the decision, you see the map here, if you can see it well enough, this in this painting, they're looking at the Chesapeake Bay. And many of you know this story, but the decision was made not to attack the British in New York City. They got lots of information, including, we had a big forum on this a couple weeks ago, months ago now, on the Grand Reconnaissance. It was a reconnaissance in force looking at the fortifications right there, what we know as the Bronx, Kingsbridge. And they went down there, Rochambeau and Washington, and they found that the fortifications were too well done. The British were they were supported there in the city. The French ships couldn't get up here. They were going to the Chesapeake Bay. So the two generals made the agreement in August that they would march the two armies first up to Verplancks Point to cross over and then down to Virginia. Now, this is Rochambeau's headquarters, a picture from like 1910, but thank goodness it is now being restored. Oh, Friends of Odell House, Rochambeau headquarters. You can't go there yet. You can drive by. There's a little info sign, but they are working fast and furious to raise funds, and it is going very well, the restoration. So Rochambeau's headquarters. All over Westchester, there are these signs. You saw the brochure of the Washington Rochambeau Revolutionary War Trail. We are a big part of that. This one is in Dobbs Ferry. A lot happened in Dobbs Ferry. This is the whole map. And, you know, here we are in this, this key central place. The French came from Connecticut down to here. And here came Washington down to here, and camped here down to Yorktown and back. So at Yorktown, of course, that was a great success, but the British, you know, were defeated. But the French, here I throw this picture in here because a French general made this painting. He so admired the American army, including the Rhode Island Regiment. They got a lot of praise, and they were also at the siege of Yorktown. Sorry, that went back. All right. Okay. Now, we're back in Westchester. I'm going to go really fast. I think our time is, we're back. Okay, we got, this is in Van Cortlandville. They have a ceremony many years, beautiful place to go. Some of the French soldiers that died supporting us are there. There's a painting in Verplancks by Trumbull, very famous painting. They have a copy of it there. We want to get the real thing here at an exhibit. There's also a really cool painting that was done and found a few years ago. And it's in the Museum of the American Revolution. It's a contemporaneous painting of that encampment at Verplancks, showing Washington's tent in exactly the way it really was. So that's a cool thing. I don't want to leave without mentioning John Jay. He was working on the peace treaty that took a long time after the Battle of Yorktown. It wasn't until November of 1783, so Washington had to wait a long time. But John Jay is also one of those people known for the spy ring too. He knew a lot about invisible ink and all kinds of things. So that's a great place to visit. And let's see, next. Okay, evacuation day. That the British finally leave. And Washington has to travel through Westchester from Newburgh to get down there. And he does. And Francis Tavern, I say go there. It's a lot of fun if you haven't. It's not in Westchester, but it does remind me that there are a lot of historic taverns, and I'd love to see some kind of tavern tour before we get to our 250th. There's the square, and this beautiful little, you hardly notice this Jug Tavern. It's a gorgeous little place, sometimes open to the public. And the other part of the post-war is that Thomas Paine was given the cottage and land because of his incredible work that he did in support of the Patriots' cause. And you can go to New Rochelle and see that now. In fact, this weekend, there's a whole festival down there. So you can check that out on the website. And, whew, okay, I do this as fast as I can. I think the questions are going to be really interesting, but here are some of the things we've been doing over the last 4 years. We work with groups across the county, and we do all kinds of things. We think now that the state of New York has a 250th commission. Things are gonna, there'll be even more attention at the state level. So here we are before the pandemic in Yonkers. Here's Dwayne again, and we are at Kings Ferry. Down in the bottom right, we're with Major André and Benedict Arnold, two great teachers who do some plays. Here we're in Mount Vernon with George Washington, and some of the musicians are in the back there that we work with, Hearts of Oak. We love getting kids involved and what the reenactors do, as well as all those informational signs and markers that help people understand this. We're all in favor of that. We've had a lot of presentations in libraries, but all before the pandemic. I think we'll be able to rev back up now. That'll be great. This is in the Irvington Library. We did it was really fun. It was called Fact and Fiction. And we compared, what is sometimes understood in films and shows that are a little loose with the facts, but still fun. We've had 2 meetings open to the public of book discussions with a particular focus on some things in Westchester. We were involved with Iona College, helped us with one of them. That was great. YouTube. We discovered the power of YouTube, especially because of the pandemic. And we think our little videos are really helpful. They're free. They're open, to be used by the public. Many of them you'll see here, 3 minutes, 3 minutes, 3 minutes. Things about the French. So we're getting a lot of information out that way. Oh, these kids are incredible. These are 3 kids that narrated 3 of our most recent videos. And one's on Molly Dom Sneeden, John Jack Peterson, and Captain Hurlbut. And these kids, and a great film producer. This was funded by the Greenway that we were able to make those. And yes, we have a lot of information out to libraries, and we're doing a great program with libraries where we have grants to bring them programs like this, and all the library has to do is request a program, and we evaluate it and provide the fee to them so that they can hire folks to come into their libraries. And that is it. So I hope you enjoyed going on this little trek through the county. You'll be back home in Somers with Grace and Tara. And you may have some questions for Grace about local things or for Tara. But I'll do my best. I know this is like an inch deep or even a quarter inch deep about each place. And many people know much more than I do, and I stand on their shoulders. But Tara, I throw it back to you.
I'm just looking at some people made a comment or two, but Vic DeSanto said Washington was escorted into New York City on evacuation day by a unit of Westchester militia. Enoch Crosby Jr. married a daughter of Happier Bailey, according to his autobiography. I think John Dean lived in Somers during the AR for a while.
Okay, yes, Vic, hi Vic. Vic does a great show, historically interesting, and I'm glad he was able to join us today.
A lot of people have said it's a great presentation. It's a thank you. Does anybody have any questions?
Wow.
I'm interested, Constance, to know how, like, how you first got involved personally. How did you first get involved in this very wonderful organization?
Well, thank you for asking that. Anybody, essentially could do what I've done. I had the honor of serving in the Irvington local government for the last 12 years, being elected as a trustee, and then as served as deputy mayor. So one of the projects that the village wanted to do was to refresh the Veterans Memorial in Irvington. And it's right where, some of you know, the old Croton Aqueduct, it's a walking trail, it's a state park. Anyway, I saw that as an opportunity to enhance that location on Main Street by also reaching back. It had World War I and going forward, at this Veterans Plaza. And I spoke with this Eric, who I talked to you about, Eric Weiselberg, and we thought we could find that there were patriots and then there were other veterans. So we wanted to research it and add them to this memorial. Well, that turned out to be a great, we found 9 families that had members who had served in these militia units or in the Continental Army. So there's a granite plaque, and then it came to, you have to actually put the information in granite, literally. So we worked together, we held our, hands and said, we sure we got this right. But so that was the first local history project that I did related to the revolution. And I followed, it was in 2016 when President Obama and the Congress at the time signed a federal law to begin the planning a 10-year time period, 2016 to 2026. So I knew about that and I thought, well, we're just going to get ignored here in Westchester. People will go to Saratoga and never even think anything happened here. So anyway, that's, I got involved that way, and it's very rewarding. And we feel like we have a lot of great partners across the state. So we're ready to rock and roll.
I have a comment from Sarah Johnson. She says, have you looked at the Committee for Safety's daily logs to track activity in Westchester County?
I personally haven't. I know about the committees of safety. I know they were in Irvington right after the Battle of Brooklyn, and they were making their way to safety. I imagine my historian, Eric Weiselberg, probably has. He did 85 pages on the Battle of Edgar's Lane, so I bet this has not gotten away from him, but I'll check with him to make sure he has. I think there'll be some great stuff in there.
Okay, does anybody have any other questions?
I do. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Some of those images are just beautiful. Actually, a lot of them are very artfully done. I was just wondering if there are places that you know of here in the county where people might go to see any of this this art that we saw today, or some of the maps and things, other than the archives. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, you're thinking just like me, Grace, because there isn't a place, and I'm bound and determined to get by 2026, an actual museum quality exhibit in Westchester where we gather together these things. So it would be nice to bring the things, some of the things that are in Philadelphia. There's a big, I'm going to call it a rifle, but somebody's going to connect. It's going to, maybe it's a musket, or it's a long gun in the Metropolitan Museum of Art that was owned by a militiaman in Westchester. I mean, there are objects that could be brought here, paintings that could be brought here. So we're working on it. You know, a great philanthropic donor who wants to put a few $1 million into it, you know, we're ready. But yes, it's a shame you have to kind of go all over the internet and search for things, but it should be easier.
Any other questions?
I'd like to just make one clarification if there's no other questions.
I guess you get the floor as a co-sponsor here.
Okay, well, I wanted to thank you again. That was really wonderful. But Tara, I just happened to think too, for those of you in Summers, when we talk about the possibility of it being broadcast on public access, it would be during the month of July.
Okay, great.
That's right. Right. All right. Well, I've really enjoyed getting to know all of you up there. I hope to come back, and maybe there'll be like volume 2 or episode 2 of Turn,
Yeah.
and we'll cover some of the other places and things that we've left out. But I learn a lot from every place I go, so I thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you, Constance, for joining us, and thank you, Grace, as well. You guys have been terrific. This is a wonderful program.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, everybody.